Hello, everyone. I'm Victor Manibo. I'm a senior attorney here at Wang Law Office, and you are watching the AM show, Wang Law Office's question and answer show.
Hi, my name is Ariel. I'm the host, also senior paralegal at Wagner Office. Our show going to start every Friday at 11 a.m. EST, 8 a.m. PST.
Here at the AM show, we try to answer all your most pressing immigration questions. We get questions from our viewers through Line or YouTube and any of our platforms, and we collect them every week to talk about one particular topic. This week, we're going to talk about asylum, in particular, what persecution is and how you need to establish that in order to get asylum.
Yes, before we start today's topic, Victor, can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Sure. For those who haven't met me yet, again, my name is Victor Manibo. I'm a senior attorney here at the Wang Law Office, and I've been with the firm for over 10 years. I've been a lawyer for over 12 years, and I graduated from Cardozo School of Law here in New York. I am licensed to practice in New York and New Jersey, although because our firm practices immigration law, and that's federal, we can serve clients all over the country. Most of what I do is immigration litigation, meaning I help non-citizens and defend them from removal in immigration courts, and immigration applications, meaning I help non-citizens apply for immigration relief with our various immigration agencies. Aside from being a lawyer, I'm also a writer. I came out with a science fiction novel last year called The Sleepless.
Yes, so back to today's topic. Victor, what are the requirements for asylum seeker?
So this is a good refresher question. We've had YouTube videos about asylum before, but just as a reminder, there are several requirements for it. First, an asylum seeker must be located within the United States. You can't apply for asylum when you're not in the United States. You can apply for refugee status, and that's different. And that's not something that most of our viewers are asking about or familiar with. So asylum, you have to be in the US. And you have to show that you have a well-founded fear of persecution. And we're going to be talking about this a lot more during the show. A well-founded fear of persecution, meaning there is, you're afraid of going back to your home country, and there's a good reason for you to be afraid of going back to your home country because of persecution. Now, persecution can be past persecution, meaning you've suffered in the past, in your history before you came into the United States, or future persecution, meaning you're afraid that if you go back to your home country, if you leave the United States and go back, you will be persecuted. This persecution, another requirement is that the persecution should be based on certain factors: your race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Persecution should also come from the government or a party or an entity that the government does not want to control or is unable to control. And finally, the last requirement is if you're seeking asylum, you have to apply for it within 1 year of entering the United States. So those are the basic requirements. So you'll see a lot of that has to do with persecution, when it happens, how it happens, and who does it. So we're going to talk about that, particularly how to establish persecution.
So, what do you mean by persecution?
Persecution is not a term that's specifically defined in our immigration laws, but through cases in the BIA and the circuits, it's gotten the definition that it's a threat to life or freedom. Meaning if you will be harmed in some way, if you will be detained in some way, if you have the risk of death. So these are examples of persecution. And the persecution, again, for purposes of asylum, has to be because of your race, your religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So someone is persecuted and can apply for asylum if somebody harms their body, harms their life, harms their freedom, or threatens to do any of those things, because maybe because they're Muslim, or maybe because they come from a specific country, right? Maybe because they're Black. I mentioned all these bases. The harm that is inflicted on the asylum seeker should be because of these factors.
What will the asylum officer use to decide if there is a persecution?
So when asylum seekers, want to see if they want to apply for asylum, they always think, okay, well, how do I prove that, right? It's important to think about what the USCIS officer looks at when they think about persecution, right? So as an asylum officer, the one who reviews these applications will look at the severity of the harm. So how bad is it, basically? If you, for example, in your home country was beat up by police officers, because I mentioned before, the persecutor has to be someone from the government generally. If the police beat you up because of your race, for example, and you broke a lot of bones, the more severe the harm, the more you easily establish persecution. So that's one thing. The officer is looking for the severity of the harm. Two, the officer is looking for the motivation. Again, you have to establish that you were beat up, you were imprisoned, you were threatened because of the 5 factors that I listed out. The motivation has to be about race or religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. If cops beat you up because you stole from them, for example, and they were pissed off, that is a crime. The cops would not have done that. The cops were wrong, but the cops were not motivated by hatred of your race or hatred of your religion, right? So that's something that the asylum officer is going to be looking at. Another thing that you need to establish for persecution is who the persecutor is. Again, this has to be either the government of that home country or a person or a party or like entity that the government cannot or does not control, is not willing to control. For example, cops, that's easy. Clearly, that's the government, right?
Yes.
That's part of the government. But there are gangs. If a gang beats you up because of your religion, that's not the government. So you can't seek asylum based on that. However, if, for example, there is a gang that the government controls or a gang that the government is unwilling to control, then you might be able to get asylum. So you have to think about who this person is who's like harmed the asylum seeker and how they're related to the government.
So how about a government-funded company? I know that some people say there's a company is funded by the government. Is that going to be a persecutor?
So a government-funded company, for example, that might be a little hard to prove that the persecutor is the government, especially because the government funds a lot of companies depending on what country you're in, right? Sometimes the government owns certain corporations. Now, it's a case-to-case basis. The answer here is it depends, but it's helpful to be able to establish that, okay, so there's a private, maybe a private security group who beat you up because of your religion. And it's private, but also it's partly government owned. You might be able to prove that it's the government that's persecuting you, or at least the government is allowing this persecution to happen.
So the persecution means that you are physically harmed, right?
Well, that's what people think about mostly when they think about persecution or fear of returning, because, they are going to arrest me, they are going to detain me, and then they're going to beat me up, they're going to torture me, they're going to do something physical to me, they're going to kill me. That's the worst physical harm, right? And that's part of it. That's definitely persecution. However, that's not the only thing that is persecution. It can be threats. If you're threatened, to be killed, for example, if the police are saying, if you come back here, we will shoot you because you have this political opinion, for example. Okay, they didn't do anything physically to you, but that threat it constitutes persecution. If you have been harassed, for example, if the police or the military keep calling you and your family leaving nasty phone calls, searching your house. They don't physically harm you, but that is still persecution. Harassment is persecution. Discrimination, depending on the type of discrimination and the extent, can also be persecution. Economic harm, if they take away your property, if they interfere with your business, that can also be persecution. Obviously, when somebody is targeted by the government, it can take a lot of forms. It's not just physical. It could be a combination of these things. And the more that you can establish these kind of little incidents, whether or not it's physical or economic or mental, the more you have these and the more proof you have of these, the better you can show that you were persecuted.
So is that required the harm being happened in the past?
We've been talking about someone fearing to going back to the country of origin because something bad happened to them. However, in asylum, there are two types of persecution. One is past persecution, which is what we've mostly been talking about. Something happened to you before when you were still in your country of origin, and that's why you came to the United States to escape, right? That's the standard asylum, or at least that's pretty common. The second type of persecution is future persecution. This happens specifically for people who maybe came into the United States, are already here, they don't have status or they lost their status, and something changed in their life or something changed about their home country that makes them afraid to go back, because if they go back, something bad will happen to them. So this is, again, future. Maybe nothing bad happened to this person while they were at their home country, but now at this point in time, if they go back, something bad will happen. So those are just two sides of the coin. Of course, for some people, there may be past persecution and also future persecution.
Both are combined, right?
Yes.
Stan, can you give me more detail? What is future persecution?
So future persecution, like I mentioned, is something that hasn't happened yet. It is something that the asylum seeker fears will happen if they are returned to the home country. This could happen, for example, let's say you come in here to the United States, you're from Hong Kong, right? And you come in here, nothing bad happened to you in Hong Kong, and while you're here, you don't have status, and you don't want to go back to Hong Kong because maybe while you're here, the democratic uprisings in Hong Kong happened, right? And now you're afraid because you are a pro-democracy leader, you advocate for or against the Chinese government. Just as an example, maybe this person is afraid. Nothing bad happened to him before, but if he goes back, he might be arrested. He might be questioned, detained. Any other physical or economic harm might happen to him. So that person, even though no bad thing happened to him in the past, can apply for asylum based on future persecution. Now, they have to prove certain things for future persecution. Obviously, it's harder to prove a little bit because, there are no injuries. There is history, right? Nobody got arrested. Nobody went to the hospital. But if a person is able to show that that person, the asylum seeker, possesses one of the 5 factors, the race, religion, political opinion, and that the persecutor or the government is aware that they have this characteristic. So, for example, if it's known in Hong Kong that this person is a pro-democracy leader, maybe he's a famous pro-democracy leader. So the cops there, or the anti-democracy forces there, know him and can target him when he comes back.
Maybe he's already on a list.
Right. Maybe they're all on a blacklist or something, right? Maybe these are the people who, we know this person, we're going to wait for him once he lands at the airport in Hong Kong. And that's possible. That happens. And if the persecutor has that knowledge and has the capability to punish the asylum seeker, then that's going to help prove future persecution.
So what if I have no past persecution and I'm already in the US? I'm afraid to go back because of something that I did. Maybe I'm a Christian in the US. That's normal, right? After I left China, is that still future persecution?
This is a question that we get a lot. The example that I gave earlier, with the political activist who doesn't want to return to Hong Kong. The change happened in the home country. Hong Kong changed, right? The person didn't do anything. He was always a pro-democracy leader. Now he's afraid because the situation in the country of origin has changed, right? Now, this question that you're asking if the person has changed. So they left their home country, they came into the United States, they changed their religion. The country hasn't changed. They changed their religion. This comes up for some of our Chinese viewers who left China, came here, became Christian, and are afraid to go back to China because of their Christian beliefs, because of the fear that they would be imprisoned, questioned, tortured, all the other stuff that constitutes persecution. China didn't change, but the person changed. Is that still future persecution? Well, the important thing to think about with future persecution is it's a fear of what could happen to you. Now, if this Christian person goes back to China, what could happen to them is they could get persecuted. They could get detained. They could get harmed physically and economically and mentally. So the answer is yes. That's still future persecution. They can still use that for their asylum. But, you have to really establish that there will be future persecution, that harm will actually happen. So short answer is yes, that can be a basis for future persecution, but there are strategies that you have to do to be able to establish that.
So maybe another situation. What if I have been in the US for a long time? Nowadays something changed, and then I'm afraid to go back to my home country. Can I still apply for asylum?
So this is kind of similar to the last two questions, right? The first one is, what if something happened in China, or something changed in my home country in China or in Hong Kong? And then the second question was, what if something changed in me? My religion, for example, or my political beliefs have changed, even though the country didn't change. Now this question is like, something's changed in me, like whatever it is, can you still apply for asylum? This question really goes to the heart of the deadline of when you should file asylum, which I mentioned at the top of the show. You have to file this generally within 1 year of entry. If this questioner has been in the United States for a long time, regardless of what changed, if it's in the home country or in their personal circumstances, they still need to qualify. They still need to meet the 1 year deadline, or at least show that there is a good exception to the 1 year deadline, meaning they have a good reason why they were not able to file the application within 1 year.
So what kind of situation that 1 year deadline will apply?
The 1 year deadline generally does not apply for, number one, unaccompanied non-citizen children. So if that's your situation, you don't have to worry about the 1 year deadline. You can file asylum at any point after you enter the United States. Second is changed circumstances that affect the applicant's eligibility for asylum. Now, these changed circumstances are the types that you asked about before: change in the country circumstances and change in the personal circumstances. These qualify, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more later. And the other exception for the 1 year deadline is extraordinary circumstances. These are other factors, usually beyond the control of the applicant, and doesn't have anything to do with the home country. So because it's extraordinary, we're going to talk about that also a little bit later. These are kind of the extreme situations.
So can you explain more on the change of circumstances?
Change in circumstances is not specifically defined in our laws. However, our laws and regulations and cases do provide a few examples of changed circumstances, right? The first one we already talked about. If the situation changes in your home country, you left it and it was fine, and now you're about to go back, there is a possibility that you will be harmed by the government. That's changed circumstances, changed country conditions is usually the term that lawyers and judges use. The second type of changed circumstances or example is changes in the applicant's circumstances, personal circumstances, meaning if the person engages in activities outside of the country, of the home country, that put them at risk of persecution when they return. This is what we were talking about earlier. Somebody comes to the United States, converts to Christianity. That is an activity that they performed while outside the country that puts them at risk of fear of persecution when they return. So changed personal circumstances. Another type or example of changed circumstances is when it comes to dependents. Sometimes some people apply for asylum and they add their children in as dependents in the application. If there is a loss of relationship between the parent and the child, maybe the child is given up for adoption, for example. That's a change circumstances that will allow that child to later on still apply for asylum, even though it's beyond the 1-year deadline.
So how about the extraordinary circumstances?
So extraordinary circumstances are a little bit different. Again, our laws don't specifically define what extraordinary means, but we get some examples from case law and from the regulations. These circumstances are not about the country and not about the person. Examples are, you weren't able to file your asylum application because you got sick, seriously sick. You were in a coma for like a year or 2 years after you entered. That's why you didn't file your asylum application in time. It doesn't have anything to do with your home country. It doesn't have anything to do with your personal circumstances in terms of your eligibility for asylum. It just so happened you were in a coma.
Something happened.
Yeah. Another one is legal disability, meaning legally you're not able to. This usually goes for people who are minors. They're not allowed to file any applications if you're a minor, or maybe you have a mental incapacity, meaning legally you do not have, maybe temporarily you did not have the ability to legally sign a document because of your mental incapacity, meaning you can't submit an application because you're legally incapacitated from doing so. Another example is ineffective assistance of counsel, meaning if you try to apply for asylum, and this is something that happens a lot. I know you've heard some of our clients go through this before also. Somebody applies for asylum, hires a lawyer, and then the lawyer delays on it. Or maybe they forget the deadline, or maybe they say that they filed it, but apparently they did not file it, or they made it, right before the deadline, but the FedEx did not arrive on time. If any of that is the fault of the lawyer, that constitutes extraordinary circumstances that could excuse the 1-year deadline. So these are the common ones: medical reasons, legal disability, and ineffective assistance of counsel. Obviously, if there's a death in the family that prevented you, maybe you weren't the one who was sick, but maybe your spouse was sick and you had to be at the hospital. You couldn't pay for the asylum or any legal fees because you were paying hospital bills. You might be able to convince a judge to exempt you from the 1-year deadline in the cases of serious death or illness in the family. But these are the examples of extraordinary circumstances.
I know that some people can ask, if I just overstay my valid visa, maybe more than a year, maybe 18 months, can I still apply for asylum?
When the USCIS officer is thinking about the 1-year deadline, and when they're listening to your reason, the reason that you give has to be related to why you missed the deadline. And is that reason valid? Now, you're telling me you overstayed, you didn't do anything. Now, how is that related to missing the deadline? It has no relation. You didn't do anything. You just didn't want it, right? Nothing stopped you from doing it. You just didn't do it. So is that going to be an exemption? Is that going to be an extraordinary circumstance?
Looks like no.
Extraordinary circumstance. We were talking about death. We were talking about a lawyer messing things up, right? If you just forgot, if you just, wanted to wait, or even if you just didn't know that there was a 1-year deadline, even if you just didn't know, that's not enough. That's not extraordinary enough. Under the law, that doesn't exempt you from the deadline.
So I want to know, what is the benefit of asylum?
Okay, so we talked about persecution a lot. We talked about things that can happen to you, changes in your life that can make you eligible for asylum, right? Now, let's say you meet all of that. Why would you want to file for asylum? Because asylum is a protection. That's really what this is for. It's protection for people who are being oppressed because of their race, their religion, their political opinion, right? So you don't want to go back to your home country. You want to stay in the United States where you are freer, where you have more benefits and rights under the laws of the United States. So that's why you file for asylum, to be safe, to have a home where you won't be arrested by the cops or the government just because you're Black or a different race or a different religion or something. Aside from the safety and the rights, obviously an asylum status will allow you to stay here and work here, make a living here, and bring your family members here through the derivative asylum process. It will lead to a path for lawful permanent resident status and eventually to citizenship.
So besides asylum, anything else I can apply in the immigration court?
Yes, and we've talked about this before in previous episodes. Aside from asylum, there are other reliefs that are related and similar to asylum, such as withholding of removal or relief under the Convention Against Torture, or what's called CAT relief. For these, they have slightly different requirements, but they also are protections for people who are being oppressed, who are at risk of being killed, being detained, being tortured in their home countries. Usually when people apply for asylum, they also apply for these reliefs. So just note that these are other options aside from asylum, but they're usually pursued together. You can check out our previous YouTube episode on this for more details on the specific requirements and the differences between each.
So if you or your relative have suffered something in the past or afraid of going back to your home country for something might happen in the future, you should call to consult with the lawyer.
Right. Our immigration laws are sometimes geared to protect the innocent. That's why we have asylum. That's why we have VAWA. That's why we have U visas. Our asylum system or our immigration system is not just for families and businesses. It's also to help the people who need it the most. And asylum is one of them. So if something bad happened to you, or you feel like something bad might happen to you because of something that is not within your control, like your race or religion, and the government is after you, you might be able to apply for asylum, especially if you have been persecuted in the past or you fear persecution in the future. If this is your situation, I would heavily suggest that you consult with us so that we can take a look at your case and see your eligibility. We do these YouTube shows and we offer my legal opinion, which is based on my legal experience, but it's not legal advice. It's not advice specific to anyone's case, and it's not legal representation. So if you consult with us, you can get legal advice and potentially legal representation for you or for your family member.
Yes, and you can continue follow us on YouTube. We'll be back again next week with another show, Friday at 11 a.m. EST and 8 a.m. PST. See you then.
Bye.